today. So, and I'll just go ahead and jump into her bio. In the midst of political turmoil, economic distress, and racial inequality, civil rights attorney Jasmine Crockett laced up her shoes to march for justice and run for the Texas House of Representatives. Though the media has covered Crockett's boundless efforts to seek justice for high-profile clients, very few are able to witness her quiet relentlessness and genuine safekeeping for those individuals after the cameras and limelight have passed. Her passion for empowering people politically and in justice led to her career as a public defender, county party chair, and civil rights and criminal defense attorney, focused on defending our most vulnerable neighbors from unlawful accusations and exploitation in the criminal justice system. Jasmine has purposely made every decision with one goal in mind: protecting the civil liberties of those in underrepresented communities. Now she has brought that fighting spirit and fire to the Texas House of Representatives. Jasmine won her race with a trailblazing voter contact operation that was about listening and learning from the community and earning the trust and support of voters. Jasmine won with overwhelming grassroots and community support from her neighbors and constituents who agreed it was time for a new generation of leadership to disrupt policies as usual and get to work for the people. As a freshman lawmaker going into session during a pandemic, budget shortfall, and redistricting, she hit the ground running with a robust and comprehensive legislative agenda to address kitchen table issues that have been pressing in her district since way before the pandemic. Economic recovery that includes all: fair district maps, expanding healthcare and access to the ballot box, lowering property taxes, and reforming the criminal justice and policing systems are her top priorities. Representative Jasmine Crockett earned her BA in Business Administration from Rhodes College and her JD from University of Houston. She is licensed to practice law in Texas, Arkansas, and federal courts. Crockett is the past Bowie County Democratic Party chair, holds various leadership positions within the legal community, former board member of the Dallas County Metro Care Services, and is a proud member of the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, okay? And she is a founding member and vice chair of the Texas House Progressive Caucus, and Representative Crockett is appointed to serve on the Criminal Jurisprudence and Business and Industry Committees. Ooh, y'all, that was a mouthful, but I know my soror does work, okay? And we are so excited to have you here. We'll love to just jump right in and start talking with some questions. Representative Crockett, do you have anything you wanted to start off with?
I just wanted to say thank you so much. You did not have to read all that. It really makes me seem like I've done way more than in my mind I've done. That's for sure. But no, I really want this to be as educational as possible for y'all. So I want y'all to ask me questions about whatever it is that's on your mind, because you guys are on the front lines. You know, there's no movement that doesn't start without young people. Young people have been at the front of every major movement, right? Even when we talk about MLK, you know, MLK was killed when he was kind of young, right? And so, you know, he started that very, very young. So I'm very interested in knowing what it is that you want from me, what you need of me. And I am here to encourage y'all because I really do believe in y'all's generation more than y'all would ever know.
Well, we love to see that and love to hear that. So y'all, like she said, feel free to drop a question in the chat and we'll go ahead and answer them here. But to get things started, can you give us a brief rundown of the 2021 legislative session, just for those who might not know, just give us a quick spark notes, if you will.
Okay, first of all, if you don't know what's happened in the Texas House in 2021, you've been under a rock. That's all I got to say, okay? Because sadly enough, our governor cannot stay out of national news for always being on the wrong side of everything. So the highlights or the lowlights, whichever way you want to look at it, we did permitless carry, which means that everyone over the age of 21 can carry a firearm. At the same time, one thing that they don't talk about that they did in that bill is they increased the punishment for unlawful possession of a firearm by a felon. And so it's very interesting because I argued that you would have quote unquote bad guys because they were like, this is for the good guys. And I'm like, so tell me how you know a good guy from a bad guy. If they Black or if they white, I'm not really sure, right? So I really was nervous about this bill, number one, because I'm like, Black people are going to feel like, oh, I can carry a firearm too. And I'm like, half these laws are not written for us, okay? Because law enforcement is still, they'll kill us for so much less, right? So very scary proposition on that part. And then also just this idea of the selective enforcement of the portion about unlawful possession of a firearm by a felon. I absolutely believe that there will be a lot more African Americans and brown folk that will get arrested and now be facing 20 years instead of facing 10 years in prison. And that's if they don't have another prior that they can use for enhancement purposes. So we had permitless carry. We obviously also had SB 8, which was the abortion ban, which I never thought that would go into effect because it's unconstitutional. So I was like, whatever, y'all just want to campaign on this. And then it went into effect. And then like the Supreme Court didn't do anything to stop it. And then finally the DOJ stepped in, and we won on the trial level. And within about 24 hours, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed that. So we've got that going. And so abortions are an issue in the state of Texas now. Obviously, they won't stop abortion just like they ain't stop people from smoking weed just because it ain't legal, right? Okay. They're just making it more difficult and they are putting people really in harm's way. That is my opinion as it relates to marijuana, as well as it relates to abortions, right? Because people that are desperate will do things out of desperation. Not everyone will have the luxury of being able to afford to go across state lines and get a procedure done. And there's so many complexities to why people find themselves in the position of needing an abortion when they do end up in that position. And so when you start talking about the socioeconomics of it, it really gets into some hairy territory. And I think that we are putting more lives at risk by making it illegal. Just like we do with marijuana, we end up with so much marijuana that we don't know actually what's in it. And so we would actually have a cleaner product if we just legalized it. We would also have another stream of income so we don't have to raise property taxes on everybody every time you look around. And we would actually have a safer border in the state of Texas if we actually stop the Black market need for marijuana. So that's that on that front. So as you can see, I'm a marijuana advocate, but that's because I was a business major, not because I smoke. And so I understand economics and I understand business, and this is a money move, right? And there's been money that the states have monetized Black bodies, right? So to the extent that basically incarceration is nothing but legalized slavery. And so anything that they can do to kind of lock us up. But at this point in time, we're really running out of space for people that we really need to lock up, like violent offenders versus people that are getting high or are trying to help other people get high. And so we really need to be smarter about this so we could actually save so much money on incarceration while at the same time making money. So, that's my spiel on that. We didn't get anywhere on marijuana, but it's not because I didn't try. I filed a ton of bills. I filed more marijuana bills than anybody else. In addition to that, we had this election integrity nonsense. If you've paid attention to the news, you know that we went to DC in order to try to get around the election suppression bill that they were pushing forward with in the state of Texas. That bill ultimately has passed. It is supposed to go into effect in December 2nd of this year. Is when it's supposed to go into effect. So we're still waiting on the feds to wake up and realize that democracy is kind of on the line and they need to do what they have to do, which includes getting rid of the filibuster. Because here it is, it's already a minority of states that have too much control anyway when it comes to the US Senate, because it's all these small racist states that, each state gets 2 senators, whether it's California or Mississippi, right? So they're already really putting us in a disadvantaged situation where we really aren't listening to or adhering to the will of the majority in this country. And then you add the filibuster, and that's 10 more Republicans from small states, right? And so it's really like a super minority is actually ruining democracy for all of us in this country. So we had our voter suppression bill.
Mhm.
And if you want me to go into details about that later, then I can, but it's voter suppression. In addition to that, we actually had some anti-protester bills that no one is talking about. And so instead of passing the George Floyd Act because people felt the need to hit the streets, they actually enhanced punishment for protesters. And so the punishment had been a misdemeanor, obstruction of a highway. They added an enhancement. They tried to do one for outfits. And I was like, when do we do enhancements to felonies or any enhancement because somebody wore a certain outfit? Stop that. So that one didn't go through, but they did do one, and it was like, oh, if law enforcement is present, I'm like, well, law enforcement is always present during a protest, right? This obstruction thing, right? So it enhances it to a felony, which is a problem. I ended up representing well over 300 protesters in Dallas. I think it was closer to 400 or 500. Not really sure, but hundreds of protesters in Dallas, and not one of them has been convicted of anything. I got all those cases dismissed. So this is complete nonsense, and we don't need people getting arrested for felonies. They also tried to make it to where if you were involved in a protest, that you cannot bail out. So they had a terrible bail bill. I beat them up pretty badly on that one. And so that part of the bail bill didn't go through. But the part about charitable organizations being able to bond people out, because during the protest, lots of like nonprofit organizations raised money and they went and they posted bail for people. They actually are putting a stop to that as well. So no one organization can bail out more than I think 3 people in a cycle or some nonsense. I don't know. Wow. Where else? I don't know. It was all bad. I don't really know what else to say, except it was bad. There was a defund the police bill that was really awful. They were mad at large cities that decided to reimagine policing in their budget. And so now if a large city, this only applies to the large cities, don't apply to the small ones. Small ones are good. Large ones are not. So in the large cities, if they increase their police budget, they have to leave it increased. They can never decrease it. So if people start moving out the city, and so they don't have the tax revenue and they don't have a need for as much law enforcement, they can't go back down. If they go back down, then the state is actually going to take money from them. So you basically can't ever reduce your budget. And it really hurts large metropolis areas because, like, for instance, I think they're trying to get like the World Cup to come to Texas. And so like for a really big event like that, you normally would increase your budget, like for Super Bowl or any like large event, you would increase your policing budget to accommodate that event, but then you needed to go back down. There's no exception. So that's a rundown of probably some of the nonsense. There was a lot more, but that's some of it.
That is quite a lot. We actually had a couple of follow-up questions on that. Okay. And the askers, if y'all want to jump on live, let me know. We can absolutely, we love to facilitate that conversation and just talk. You know, we're here to just discuss. So the first one was, do you think they might reevaluate the abortion law in Texas that they've passed since it goes against Roe v. Wade, or do you think this is already finalized? And that was from Amani. I hope I'm saying that right.
No, they're not going to reevaluate. They're doubling down. I mean, when we debated this on the floor, we were like, so it's unconstitutional, right? The bill author is actually a licensed attorney. So I was like, girl, do you know what Supreme Court precedence is, right? Like, and it didn't matter. So I was really of the impression that they just wanted something to campaign on, because this is a very tough election cycle for Republicans, because during redistricting, what they do is they draw their districts as red as possible. And so what happens is they end up with crazy like primaries, but they rather have a primary than a general and risk flipping the seat. And so, you know, this was what we call red meat. They wanted something that they could actually campaign on, is all I thought it was. And I think everybody kind of got thrown for a loop. Like, wait a minute, y'all are letting this happen? Like, what's going on? But Texas is the one that actually appealed the ruling. And there have been calls for the governor to put the bill back on for the call. So when we're in a special called session, we can only deal with things that the governor puts on the session versus a general session. You can deal with anything. And there are conservatives that are upset that this bill doesn't have an out for even victims of rape. They thought that rape and incest like was a little too far and that they should really reform that. And the governor was like, nope, I'm not doing that. And then one thing that's not been talked about is when those Democrats went back for the special session to allow the governor to pass this terrible voting bill, as well as the terrible bail bill, he also doubled down on abortion. So they actually passed another bill that hasn't really been talked about because it's not gone into effect yet, where they actually are making it illegal for women to receive pills as well. So if you are pretty early on, I think up to 10 weeks, maybe is the number. I'm not really sure, so don't quote me on that. But I think up to 10 weeks, a woman has an option of having like an actual procedure, or the doctor may say, hey, you can take this pill and this should allow it to kind of pass, right? They have disallowed that now and you can't order it or anything. So he doubled down. So we're not going to get anywhere in the state of Texas. Our only hope is, once again, on the federal level, where the U.S. House is doing their part. The U.S. Senate is failing us every single day.
Wow. Yeah. And Amani, I hope that answered your question. That was really good insight. We actually had another one. This one is like a comment and a question blended in. I think it's actually two questions. So I'll go ahead and read it and then feel free to respond. So it starts off, reverse ageism does exist. As a relatively young person and someone who looks a decade younger than what you actually are, when you, okay, black don't crack. And when you ran your campaign, did you find it difficult with resonating and gaining the trust of older voters? It continues, also, many times the answers we get from older voters and community members is learn and wait your turn. So how did you combat the baby boomer mindset, and what advice do you have for other young activists looking to get involved in this space that's dominated by, and I love this part personally, seasoned individuals?
Listen, y'all are giving me all my life on this Saturday afternoon. I just want y'all to know that. And thank you for looking up my age, child, talking about who looks a decade younger. All right. So I will tell you, first of all, that was a very insightful question. Mind-blowingly insightful. I actually did. The number one question on the campaign trail was, baby, how old are you? That was the number one question. Number one question, right? Like no one else was asked that. And the thing is, there were two people in my race that were younger, but they didn't look it. So they didn't get asked. I'm like, this is nonsense. I'm like, I'm not even the baby in this race. But you know, I was the one that looked the youngest. And so that was always the question. But what I would do is, I would tell them, I would be upfront, and they would look, and that made them feel better. But in addition to that, I really more so showcased my intellect and my understanding of the position. And it kind of made all questions kind of fall to the side, right? Like they were like, oh, okay, this little girl, maybe little witch, she knows what she's talking about, right? So I ended up with like my senior supporters. So I've got like a whole senior crew. And I think it's really important for you to, just like, you know, in any movement that we've had, we find allies. You get your old school allies, right? So I got my old schoolers, and they will go tell their other friends, right? And so you find those that really get it and get you, and you really end up having surrogates. So I really encourage that. All of my seniors love me. They still stay in this fight with me. They call other seniors. So when we were doing phone banking, I would have them call other seniors, right?
Awesome.
And so I would just like basically build your coalition, right? Because not all of them are going to be against you. Find the ones that are for you. And hopefully it's like seniors that are influential in some way, because I was really trying to get to those that were influential in their communities. And I remember Mr. Walker, he's like one of my big supporters, and he walked me around the neighborhood and he introduced me to his neighbors, and he'd say, she's a civil rights lawyer. Like that was the thing that he felt like was really going to connect with so many of them. And it was really refreshing for them because they had kind of come through like that time period, right? And so to see someone like in today's time who really understands that part, that was important to them. So also make sure that you're finding out really what matters most to them, not because you believe it's what matters, but because you're having an actual conversation. It's the same thing that happens with like young folks. Like people be like, how do you get them young people to talk to you and how you get them involved? And I'm like, so I just kind of talk to them. So y'all should start talking to them instead of talking at them, right? And making assumptions about them. And definitely make sure, I do this with my younger generation and my older, make sure there is some sense of ownership, right? Like you get them involved and give them an ownership role in your campaign or whatever it is that you're pushing for. We had 26 interns in my office this session, more than anybody else in the Capitol. And my interns got to propose bills. And I actually filed a number of those bills, right? Like they could sit down, talk to me. I didn't talk at them. They knew that I had an open door policy. We would talk through like why something made sense or why it didn't make sense, or they would have to explain to me why they felt like it was a good bill. They did a great job. And I filed a number of those bills. So like give people ownership, whether it's older or younger folk, make sure that you're really giving them an opportunity to really participate and be involved.
I love that. Oh, wow. And just one interjection, that question came from Sean Reed. I don't know if you know Sean.
Oh,
but,
I know Sean.
Okay.
That's why it was so insightful. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So flowing to our next question. This one is from Ellie Mae Fisher. Come on, Texas Tech. Can you detail rising in power as a Black woman into the Texas House? Or just highlight your process for those, interested following a similar path. And I'll ask you to tack on a second question to that, or rather a second part is encompassing why you decided to run for public office.
Yeah, so we'll say the Black tape is serious.
Okay.
So I'm only the 22nd, lucky number 22. The
on, 22nd
Black woman elected to the Texas House in the history of the legislature, which is absolutely like ridiculous, right? So number 1 is still in the House and number 22 is there. Mm-hmm. So that tells you like how long it's been since we've actually had an opportunity. And so, I really had to chart my own territory. I think that it's important that if you decide that you want to run for office or whatever it is that you decide that you're doing, that you be very confident in who you are, especially when you're coming in and you're going to be like the young one, right? You can't really put yourself into a situation where you're questioning yourself because it makes it more difficult for you to actually rise. And so I came in since day one. I've been quite confident in who I am and what I was doing. In fact, I'm finishing drawing the map for the entire Dallas County delegation because I'm like, listen, y'all are messing this up. We gonna have a problem, so
it's fix it, right?
Exactly. And I'm like, I can't just sit here. Mm-hmm. And so I think confidence, knowing your purpose, knowing why you're doing it, not doing stuff for titles. I mean, we get paid $600 a month. So it's hard for young people to run for the House, number 1, because there's this whole sustainability issue, right? So it's like, how am I actually going to live? And so that is part of the systematic issue with the Texas House in general, is that they don't want the younger voices. They don't want those voices that really live the everyday life, right? We end up with so many millionaires and trust fund babies in the House. And then we question why the laws don't work for everyday people, right? In fact, one of the House members gave another House member that decided that he was going to run for Attorney General. He's the last person to enter the race. He gave him $305,000. I ain't got no homies like that. I mean, I need to find some, right? but that's not necessarily abnormal in the Texas House. Like they have tons of money. They don't care about the $600 a month. They care about the bigger picture. They care about making sure that like whatever investments they have in the oil industry, that those things remain sound, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's how they are trust fund babies and things like that, or or real estate or whatever it is that they are into, right? Like they're protecting their interests and the interests of their friends, the one percenters. So that's that part. So understanding what you're walking into. Number two, I would say that for me, I ran because as a civil rights lawyer who also does criminal defense, I just felt like I was hitting my head against the wall and I wasn't really getting anywhere. To know that in certain counties, an African American can have weed and a white boy can have weed, and somehow only one person ends up with a record. And I'll let y'all guess who ends up with the record, right?
Right.
Like seeing the disparities because there is this idea of, well, that gets into kind of the legal weeds of it or whatever, but like understanding how they're able to commit these disparities, understanding that we obviously need to get rid of qualified immunity. That's a whole issue. That's a federal issue. But how do I minimize the contacts between African Americans and law enforcement, right? So I filed a number of bills that were really surrounding like minimizing contacts. I filed a bill to make sure that anyone that was accused of a nonviolent misdemeanor, even if it's a Class A, Class B, or Class C, which Class Cs are tickets and you're not really supposed to be incarcerated for them, but Sandra Bland was, so whole other issue. But like Class A's and Class B's, you're supposed to be incarcerated and bail out. But I'm like, especially dealing with the pandemic and there not being any social distancing in jail, we can minimize the potential lawsuits because people are contracting COVID in jail and have more space for those that are really being accused of violent offenses. And so I was like, we should just cite people to court if it's just a Class A or Class B misdemeanor. So I filed that bill. That would minimize issues like what we saw in Collin County, where we had the gentleman that was arrested on marijuana and he never got out. He died, right? Like we shouldn't have those things. So I was doing a lot of bills around kind of just minimizing overall contacts, as well as trying to increase accountability for law enforcement. I filed a bill to increase the punishment for murder by a police officer. We increased the punishment when a civilian kills a police officer. Got you. But if a police officer shoots us, he's facing 5 to 99 or life. And if he kills us, he's facing 5 to 99 or life. So I'm like, I need to give an incentive not to go through with it, right? So like, I increased the punishment to a minimum of 15, but obviously that didn't go anywhere. So I really wanted to be smarter about how I went about trying to help those in my community, from policing issues to actual just kind of criminal justice issues overall.
Okay, wow. Yeah, I love that. I hope y'all are taking, this is really insightful. I love it. So transitioning to our next question, is how has your leadership evolved during the span of your lifetime? And I know you're still pretty young, but yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Man, so it's interesting because I've always been in leadership roles. I really have. From, I don't know how many of you have ever done Top Teens. I know there's got to be at least one. But I was like a national officer in Top Teens. I did, there was this program that was done through MBJ, which was like the National Black Journalism Organization. I did this deal called, it was Delteens. I did like all kinds of different like programs from junior achievement and all kinds of stuff. And I remember one of the first like trips that I was sent on by an organization was junior achievement when I was in high school, because I was selected as like a leader in my area. And I met Stedman. So that was back when Stedman was a lot younger. But it was all about business and that kind of stuff. And I was elected to like student council and all that kind of stuff. So I've always really been, by the time I got to law school though, I really did slow down because I was very nervous about failing. So I was zoned in. It was either law school or it was work. I didn't really do anything else. I didn't try to be involved in anything else. I just was very like laser focused. And so that's all I really did in law school. And then once I graduated, it was like real life. So it wasn't until I kind of felt like there's a void. So my first election, I ran for district attorney in Texarkana. I was 28. So I was only 3 years out of law school. The state of Texas had not elected a Black woman district attorney. We had only elected one Black male, I think 2 years before I ran, was when Craig Watkins was elected. And so I actually ran for office with $7,000 and a heart that believed I could do it. And we won the early vote, and we lost on election day, and they spent about $60,000 to beat me. And so after that, I ended up having my own firm, but I ran because I was so frustrated with our district attorney's office. And so for me, it's always been, my frustration has led to like my fire, right? And so I really said, I don't know that I'm running for office again, because that's a lot of work and people don't know that they need to give money, but everybody want to sign or a shirt. Like, I was just like, this is a lot of work, you know, and and there's so much education that we really have to do, especially in our communities, around elections and like what it really looks like to participate in an election and make sure that your candidate of choice can make it past the finish line. And I just didn't want any parts of it. And as I grew more and more frustrated with the laws overall, I thought, all right, fine, I need to go write the laws because these people are idiots. I promise you that was my thoughts. And I still think so many of them are idiots. Nevertheless, I was just like, they just don't know. So I was like, I'm gonna go and educate them. It didn't work out that way. Didn't work. I did school them now. There's video footage of me schooling them on some stuff. But, you know, they do what they want to do. And, you know, I think that the younger voices are needed, but more so the younger energy. I think I injected some energy in the House that really hadn't been there. And we really need people to be energized and fired up and like mad as hell as they are trying to just pass laws that are so regressive and draconian. You can't just sit there and say, well, this is how it is. You know, like, if you've been there too long, that's kind of your attitude because you used to being beat down, right? But like, I'm not used to this domestic violence, so I'm fighting back. So, you know, I think we need the younger energy. And I know that there's some candidates that have reached out to me about various races. And I'm hoping we do get some younger blood in the House and really everywhere. We've got some great young people that have been elected to city councils all over the state of Texas, young Black people, young Black men, really. So I'm really excited. So, you know, I'm here for whatever it is that y'all are trying to do, so long as y'all are trying to change the world for the better.
Okay, we love to hear. And I know in NAACP we have a little chant where we say we're fired up and ready to work. So
yes,
y'all are hearing that and internalizing that. We had another question for you from Ms. Joyce Miller. She's asking, what high school did you graduate from? And were you a member of the NAACP Youth Council then?
She must be from St. Louis because that is the St. Louis question for sure. If y'all don't know, that's the St. Louis question. So I graduated from Mary Institute St. Louis Country Day. I went to private school. And no, I did not do the youth council when I was younger. It's like one of the organizations I didn't do.
But you did the rest of them, y'all.
I did.
I love that. Okay. Another question is, is from Cope, our first VP, who's asking, I know there are a lot of aspiring attorneys on the call. What advice do you have for them navigating a predominantly white space?
Ooh, that's a good question. First of all, let me just tell y'all, go to law school where you can save the most money. Do not come out with mounds and mounds of debt. You know, you'll get hired wherever, so long as you do well. Do not add 6 figures of debt if you can avoid it. Please, please, please. So that's my first piece of advice. As it relates to kind of navigating that space, it's a tough question. I don't really know that there really is a good way to navigate it, right? Because sadly, when you look at it, in fact, one of the panels that occurred this morning, there was a young lady talking about being the only African-American in her firm and how she went to a big firm as soon as she got out. And, you know, her big deal was make sure that you make an opportunity for someone else. Don't just sit there and complain that you're the only one, but say, hey, I want to be on diversity, you know, recruitment, right? I want to be on the team because for whatever reason, y'all not finding the Black folks. So like, put me in the game, coach, right? So I think that the best way to navigate is not necessarily to assimilate, because I think that's what really happens is a lot of people assimilate instead of being really true to who they are. I think authenticity is like number one. Number two, and the reason I say that is because you need to make sure in those white spaces, they know who we are instead of trying to be like them, because you're not giving the education that they really need that can help them to basically navigate the realities of the world that we live in, which is a lot more colorful than many people want to admit. Number two, make sure that you're creating a space for someone else, because it's not enough just to kind of be there. What you want to do is you want to change it for the better. And no space is really complete unless it is fully diversified. And so I think that it's incumbent upon you. I know we wear so much on our shoulders, right? But I think that it is a responsibility that we have to make sure that we open doors for others to come behind us.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really good. And I really hope y'all are taking notes. I cannot stress that enough. This is really empowering for us young folks to get us fired up and ready to work. And I think this is kind of like a segue into the next question. Is how do you prepare for conversations with other leaders? So peers, elected officials, executives, people of that nature.
I think it's really important to recognize that time is absolutely valuable. So when you walk in, you want to make sure that people take you seriously. And part of taking you seriously is actually being prepared. So I would always make sure that I know who it is that I'm walking into, right? We all have kind of our niche areas that are, you know, either our passion areas or just areas that we're really good in. I definitely would walk in and make sure that I can break the ice by connecting whatever it is that they love or work on consistently with whatever it is that you're trying to talk to them about. So if you're trying to talk to them about an economic opportunity or an economic development that you feel like should exist in your area, then I think it's important for you to walk in. And even if it's like that person is a criminal justice person, you need to figure out how that relates to economics and like do that on the front end, right? So understand your audience, right? And make sure that you're not giving them a canned speech like, oh, I got to go talk to 10 people. I'm going to say the same thing to every single one of them. Make sure it is individualized to who they are, because they'll remember that a lot better and they'll connect with it. So make sure you're kind of connecting the dots. That's what I would suggest.
Okay, yeah, I love that. Adding that element of personalization to connect with people. It's all about connection. I like that a lot. So into our next question is, what can young people do? I know we kind of touched on this in some of our previous responses, but if you were to sum it up, what can young people do to take their leadership to the next level?
So I think that, so what I tell people all the time, right now, it's really hard for people to run for office because we haven't cut out our lines and that kind of stuff. But what you really want people to do is you want people to draft you, right? Okay. So do the work. Don't just like show up one day and say, oh, like I want to lead whatever, right? Just do the work to the point that people feel like it's their idea, right? I've been drafted for everything at this point, and I'm like, I'm not running for that. I'm not running for that. I'm not running for that, right? Like, you know, but like when you show up in the community, it's a natural transition. It makes it so much easier for you to get into those positions if people already see you on the ground and they really see you in the position without you having the title. Like I took out an incumbent, kind of. She wasn't really an incumbent, whole other issue, but she was technically an incumbent. And part of the reason was at the time that she was elected, the pandemic hadn't hit. So she was elected at the end of like January. And we started early voting like 2 or 3 weeks later. But the pandemic hit and they didn't see her rise to the occasion. And so here it is, she's got the title, but she didn't rise, right? But here it is, I don't have the title, but I was doing COVID testing sites. I was doing so much in the community. I was making sure people were getting food. We were doing food giveaways. We were doing masks, making sure people got masks. We were out there like helping. And so people saw me and they thought, man, she is the leader, right? Like she doesn't have the title, but she's doing the work. And
Mhm.
so it was kind of like a natural transition for some of them.
Okay, yeah. It's almost like don't talk about it, be about it.
Absolutely. I love that.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. This one's kind of out there, a little off topic a little bit, but it's what was your role in the quorum breaks? We just kind of circled back around.
I was one of the main agitators. I don't really
Right.
know, it was, I was sitting there frustrated. A senior member, Trey Martinez Fisher, he was the one that educated me about
Mhm.
the fact that we could do a quorum break. I wasn't really in Delta mode because then I was like, oh, or just any organization. Let me not say that, but
Yeah.
like we all understand a quorum has to be made to actually like conduct business, but I just wasn't thinking that way. And he was the one that like educated me on it. And so I was like, well, why we been sitting here? Why we ain't left already? I was like, this crazy. And so I started pushing for a quorum break like every which way. And I was just sitting there pouting. And I remember like this one senior member, after we broke quorum the first time, he goes, are you finally happy? I was like, yes. I was like, yes, we finally did something, And
Okay.
so
Yeah.
he was like, yeah, because you've been mad. I was like, yes, because we were just sitting here and people just like, well, this how it goes. So when it came time to do it again, I don't think it was as difficult to get people to break quorum the second time. The first time when we were breaking for only like 2 hours, it was like an act of Congress. So we basically started leaving the floor at like different times. And like we always are kind of on and off the floor, but like we didn't want to do like a mass exodus and like really like alert them. It's kind of like, wait a minute, they looked up and they're like, where's everybody at?
Yeah.
And so we started getting off the floor, and here it was, we still had like 14 votes left on the floor. I was like, Jesus Christ. And so we were like looking at like the voting roster, and we started like calling people. And, I was basically like calling and texting people like, yo, it's time to go. Like, get off the floor. Like, we're about to blow this. Right. And before that, there were some meetings that we had. It was a small group of us talking about like who was going to take what people to try to convince them to break quorum, trying to count up our numbers. We were having some difficulty with leadership blocking us, not wanting us to break quorum. They weren't on board. Even though they were in front of every camera, they were not on board,
No.
for
Wow.
sure. And
Yeah.
so we had to like work around them. And so it was just a lot. But we got it done. It was very ugly. We did not know that we would accomplish it the first time. And I remember like being panicked. And I said to Gina Hinojosa, I'm like, I don't know that we're gonna make it. And then she was just like, Jasmine, you gotta have faith. Just gotta have faith. Just do your part. I was like, okay. And so so we made it. But it was definitely a leap of faith. It was not the most organized thing. Now, by the time we broke quorum the second time, that was actually organized. We knew that there was a possibility that we would have to break, and we knew it would have to be for a longer amount of time. And by this point, since leadership liked the cameras, they were more so on board for doing it. So I didn't have to really do much the second time.
Okay. Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing that with us, y'all. And I don't know about y'all, but I am absolutely fired up. So we are coming close to the end of our session here. So if you all have any other questions, feel free to raise your hand, and you can ask it live. Feel free, or if you want to drop it in the chat, now is the time to do it. And thank you, Nick, for ready to work. So I'll just wrap up with a few announcements, and if we have any other questions, we can circle back. But thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Representative and Soror Crockett. We know you're busy doing the work for the people. And as a token of our appreciation for your insight and you joining us today, we'll be sending you a convention box. It'll come with a t-shirt, face mask, and a little bit more NAACP merchandise for you. Our chat support will send you a link so you can get all your details so we can send you that.
Yay.
And we want to let everyone know how they can get in touch with you, how they can keep up with anything you're doing. So let us know how they can contact you. If you feel, whatever you feel comfortable with, you can drop it in the chat as well so they can touch base with you and keep up with what you're doing. But yeah, go ahead and let them know.
Yeah, so on all social media platforms, including TikTok, Lord have mercy.
Okay, come on.
Even though TikTok has worked my nerves with their nonsense. But all social media platforms, I'm Jasmine for 100. I just dropped it in the chat. We do answer all DMs, which is a lot. But we do on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. And now we get messages, I think, on TikTok. It's something weird on TikTok now. But anyway, so we do that. The one thing that I wanted to impress upon all of you is that your voice matters. In my opinion, your voice matters a lot more than a lot of the older voices, because they had their time to kind of do their part, and here we are, right? And you're the ones that are going to have to live with whatever happens now will affect you for the next 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, right? So I want you to know that your voice, number one, matters. And number two, that you really need to raise it. Don't be shy about raising your voice, especially when you feel very strongly and passionately about something. That doesn't necessarily mean yelling at anybody, obviously, but we're talking about make sure that while you're at the table, or if you're not at the table, you go ahead and pull your chair up to it. And you make sure that you become a part of the conversation. And number three, anybody that is truly thinking that they may want to run for office, what I tell anybody who's ever looking at running for office is that you need to make sure you go and volunteer on a campaign. And this helps out candidates, obviously, but more so for you, it lets you know if you really want to run for office, because people get it twisted when they watch AOC or whoever, right? And they think, oh, yeah, you just get out there. It ain't like that, okay? Like, you need to understand what it is to run for office. And so volunteering on a campaign and learning what worked that you liked and what didn't work helps you to refine whatever you're going to do. So I've helped so many candidates get elected. I've been behind the scenes for a long time. I wasn't able to get myself elected that time, but I ended up serving as the chair of Bowie County Democratic Party, as stated. And then I obviously went into this particular capacity as well. And so, to get around money, I had to do a lot of creative things, but I think that's part of like the magic of who y'all are. You haven't been indoctrinated into this is how it has to be. You are still at that very creative level of your life. And so there's so much that you can bring to campaigns and things like that. People ask me about my Twitter all the time. They're like, oh, your Twitter. I was like, y'all, I just learned how to tweet. I was like, for the longest, my kids had to send me the tweets for my approval, because I was like, I don't know how to tweet. And I was feeling kind of bad because I was like, well, Donald Trump was tweeting. Like, clearly I can tweet, but it just wasn't like on my radar to like figure it out. I was like, I don't care. I'm over social media, right? But now all my tweets are mine for the most part, unless it's something standard. So, make sure that if there's areas that you've got a friend who's probably stronger, like, I know what graphics look good, but I'm not a graphic person, right? You can build your team and do anything that you want, probably with your peers for like no money, right? Like, because y'all are better at social media than all the old heads. End of story, hands down, right? Same thing with like graphics, and just same thing with kind of like being able to create the hype and the excitement. Like, that's what y'all do. Old people don't get anybody excited, right? Like, but that's what y'all do. Like, y'all can create and what I tell people is we used like Facebook to like blow out my competition, kind of, right? And so I don't know how much y'all go to like the clubs anymore, but there used to be this deal where you have to like wait in line, and then you get in the club and you're like, ain't nobody in here, right? But they would like create this hype by having this whole line of people outside the club. So you're like, oh, it must be popping, right? So I did the same thing with social media. I was like, listen, we just need to blow up my Facebook. It was real people. We didn't buy people, but they weren't necessarily voters in like my area. And so I would say, listen, look at how many people are following us. I mean, we must be doing something good. So we created our own hype. So sometimes you gotta be your own hype man. But hey, fake it till you make it, right? Because we made it. Like, we here now. Right? But like in the beginning, we had to like do some things. But like those are the things that like y'all do naturally, like in your sleep. Like, people would pay you to do some of this stuff, right? So also, if you've got a great skill, hey, monetize that and take it as an opportunity to learn as well, if you absolutely believe that you want to go into politics at some point.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And this is going to be our last question, y'all. Again, from Miss Joyce. She's asking, Have you worked with Aisha Davis on the Texas legislature? Did you work on the African American Studies course that's now in all Texas high schools?
No, I did not. Aisha was working on that before I was ever sworn in, but I love Aisha. Um, she is only like a week older than me, so that makes me the youngest Black elected official on the state level in Texas because I'm 1 week younger. But no, she is my buddy, my friend, and the only fight that I'm about to be in with her right now is over her lines for the State Board of Education. But we work very closely. And so as you know, obviously CRT was a big issue. I didn't even touch on that nonsense. But that was a big issue this legislative cycle. And so usually if there's some education policy, if there's a question, because that's not necessarily my natural wheelhouse, that's who I go to. But if there's an issue, she's going to come to me first. So it really is important to understand kind of the interplay between elected officials on the different levels and make sure that you really are working those relationships.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, y'all. That is all the time we have. We are so thankful that you were able to join us this afternoon. For everyone else participating, our next session is set to begin in a few minutes here, and that is with about Free Marvin Gaye. So feel free to jump over to that session. The Zoom link will be dropped in the chat, and we hope to see you all there. Actually, we know we will see you there because you've been with us all day, you've been rocking with us all day. So again, thank you so much, SOAR Representative Crockett. And we hope y'all enjoyed.